Welcome back. I'm Alyssa Fleming, healthcare partner at Womble Dickinson and recent addition to the SCbio Board of Directors. I've seen firsthand the power of the people that are part of this organization and industry, including fellow board members, investors, and state leaders. And it is indeed the power of the people that our next discussion will focus on. Many of you know that SCbio is a state affiliate of the National Bio Organization. And throughout this pandemic, we've relied on the expertise and perspective from leading executives at Bio to help educate and guide our investors, industry, and members. Today, Bio President and CEO Dr. Michelle McMurray Heath and SCbio's EVP and COO Aaron Ford will discuss the power of the people and the importance of science, diversity, and leadership in building a better world.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm excited for our discussion with Dr. Michelle McMurray Heath, President and CEO of BIO, the Bio Innovation Organization, representing 1,000 life science companies and organizations from 30 countries, the world's largest science and public advocacy association. Welcome, Dr. McMurray Heath, to our virtual annual meeting.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
Well, we're excited. And I'll tell you, you became just the third CEO in Bio's history last June, the middle of a pandemic. What a way to start. We are thankful for your leadership. Now, with the focus of today's discussion on the power of people, what has surprised you or impressed you most about the power of people in relation to working together to battle COVID-19?
Well, it's such a wonderful topic because I think 2020 showed us many things, but one of the things it shined a very clear light on was how collaboration and people working together could speed things up in a way we never even dreamed possible. So when I think of that trial by fire of starting at Bio in June and getting a chance to have that bird's eye view of our industry, that's the first thing that comes to mind. The collaborations we saw from big companies to small companies, from nonprofits to industry, from federal government scientists to our for-profit scientists. It was just so interesting to see all of those collaborations across those divides. And so I think the power of people through 2020 was really about forgetting your category or your lane and really reaching outside of that to find new ways to connect, because it was just so critical for us to find answers. And you can see the net results. I mean, the amazing vaccines and therapeutics that were developed this year are just a testament to how effective that kind of power is.
We really did see that. You're right. The bright spot is the people and the companies, as you mentioned, just working together to develop those vaccines. So now here we are, and the not so bright part, right, is the plans to administer those vaccines. What are your thoughts? How can we do better, and even future plans for vaccinations?
Well, I think we have to start at the beginning, which is we had this amazing national plan for helping accelerate the development of vaccines. Operation Warp Speed really brought different arms of the government together that are often at odds with each other to say, how can we step out of the way and help our companies go faster, which was wonderful. But we didn't see the same attention to having a plan for vaccination. And so we got what happens when you don't plan, when you don't orchestrate something that is complex and needs very finely tuned orchestration, you get a mess on your hands. And that's what we saw in late December, early January. It was a free-for-all with states really trying to grapple with a lack of direction from a federal level, lack of resources to be able to implement the plans that they did have for administering vaccines, and wanting more clear guidance from the federal authorities in terms of how to commence with their plans. We're seeing that tide shift. We're already up close to 1 million doses a day. The Biden administration just in the last couple of days has come out and said that they want us to have a target of 1.5 million doses a day, which is fantastic when you consider that the first two priority categories, 1A and 1B, contain about 80 million people just in those first two categories. So it's wonderful to have this 100 million doses delivered in the first 100 days goal. And now that's been further increased so that it's 1.5 million doses a day. And that is what it's going to take, a dedication and coordination. If there's one thing I would say that I wished the the new Operation Warp Speed and the COVID task force of the Biden administration would do is pay very close attention to making sure you're having better communication to the states about the delivery of the supply, because just having states have clarity about when they can expect doses and when doses are unlikely to come will prevent some of the wastage that we're seeing, and it will help also orchestrate the lines and the delivery so that people aren't waiting with lack of information about when they can receive their vaccines.
It so is important, that communication, right? It seems sometimes so easy, though, when you have so many people, so many different levels and agencies working together. Sometimes easier said than done, as we've all seen. Well, when we talk about process, and today's audience, engineers, right? All about process. So today's audience made up of engineers, industry leaders, clinicians, educators, all of those that support our industry and dedicated to the advancement of science. Now, they may have friends, family, challenging science and the effectiveness of vaccines because of the speed at which they were developed. How do you respond to people that have lost faith in science?
Well, faith in science was really challenged in 2020. There were messages coming from all levels of our society casting doubts on the scientific enterprise. And what I've always loved about science, and I'm a bench scientist by training, is that science doesn't care if we believe in it or not. The science is the science. And it can either be wielded to help us accomplish our goals and protect our future, or it can be misused or discarded. And so the science is there to help us if we just embrace it and take advantage of it. I know the speed made people question, well, we're corners cut, especially since there was a lot of conflicting messaging coming from the administration about whether science could be trusted or not. But I will tell you, administration aside, Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. Our companies, our science-driven companies, are about the business of human health, and they would not cut a corner no matter what was provided for them, because it just is so important to the future of those companies. And our companies transcend political administrations, and they are there for the long run to help us deal with human disease. So I have complete confidence. In fact, if there's any message I would convey is that the COVID vaccines you're seeing now went through more testing, more scrutiny, more eyes involved in the approval processes of almost any product that has gone through the FDA process. So you can have complete confidence in what's available today, and they are really shining in how both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are working.
It's right. It's right. It's that long-term view, and sometimes just having folks like yourself to help explain what science is, and like you said, I love how you said it doesn't really matter. Science is what it is. So and when you started at Bio, you were going to tackle big issues, is what you said, and you have. Announcing a bioequity agenda last August that includes 3 pillars of change. Can you explain those pillars and the importance of this agenda?
Yeah, of course. So, when we really started looking at how the country was grappling with racial injustice last summer, there were a couple of things that we wanted to achieve. We wanted to call attention to the amazing dedication and work many of our companies have been doing for decades in this space. And I know that firsthand. I've seen how our companies have really, in many cases, gone above and beyond to try to make their workplaces innovative and inclusive. Now, there's more room to go, that's for sure. There's more that can be done. And we wanted to also embrace that in a wholehearted way that didn't shy away from that reality. But we also wanted to celebrate how innovation-based businesses like ours have long known that they depend on diversity of thought to get to creative answers sooner rather than later. And speed is so important to how all of our companies operate. And so that bringing that diverse thought to the table is something I think our companies knew before many other sectors knew. So that was something we really wanted to highlight. So we have 3 areas. The first is really around clinical trial diversity and inclusion, making sure that going forward, we do everything we can as bio and as an industry to support representative clinical trials, because this is going to be so important for how communities receive our innovations, and how they can see themselves in the science. Now, we took COVID as really kind of the crucible for that. And we rolled up our sleeves and did everything we could to help our COVID vaccines, antiviral, and therapeutic manufacturers diversify their clinical trials. We helped connect them with advocacy organizations in minority communities, and we've seen great results. And in addition, we've worked very hard to advocate on behalf of affordable access to COVID vaccines and therapeutics. So all of this work was to say, we are with you. We are holding hands with minority leaders to say, how can we make sure COVID is an example of how we can do better going forward, and then learn from that example in the future. The second pillar was really around the talent pipeline. And this is something we're still in the midst of building, which is we're trying to build a virtual community of the many shining examples of minority scientists and entrepreneurs that have been nurtured within our industry to date, so that they can, particularly our smaller companies that may not have a dedicated resource to diversity and inclusion, or may not have scholarships and fellowships programs because they're really focused on getting their first product to market. We want them to be able to take advantage of some of the investments that our larger companies have made in these areas and get access to that great talent that's been trained and is at the ready. And then our third pillar is really about the power of the purse, using our great influence amongst our suppliers to make sure that we are patronizing women-owned and minority-owned businesses, or businesses who have made diversity and inclusion a large priority for their practice, so that we are incentivizing other sectors to also view this area so critically.
So a lot of work to be done, you said. And so it's just when you mention it all, it's like, whoa, And so later this morning, we are going to be talking about the power of partnerships and discuss those healthcare disparities that you mentioned that have been highlighted for many states because of COVID. So promoting that diversity in clinical trials, how do you see states achieving success in this area?
So it's so important for us to first declare the goal, to realize how important it is to have representative clinical trials. We're seeing this in real time with the COVID vaccines. The facts that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine trials had between 35 and 42% minority participation is really helping us when we're talking about communities, about how appropriate these vaccine choices are for their communities and families. So it's very, very important. So declaring the goal is first and foremost. The second is doing everything we can to decrease the barriers to participation, to make sure that we are facilitating clinical trials that can be done in disparate settings, so that you don't necessarily have to migrate to the big academic medical center to participate in a clinical trial, that you don't necessarily commit yourself to 2 years of follow-up appointments that include a lot of taking time off from work. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit we can do to simplify enrollment in clinical trials. And what I love about it is that this is something that will not just help have better minority participation in trials, it will help have better participation from everyone in clinical trials. And I think that's something that's key. And then finally, we have to embrace technology and real world evidence. We have to shrink the size of clinical trials so that they're not necessarily wedded to an out-of-date approach that is very labor, time, and human resource intensive to get to the end result. We want to know that our products are safe and effective, but we want to use the most high-tech approaches we can to shrink the footprint of clinical trials, because that's very, very key. So anything that states can do to help facilitate breaking down those barriers, to partner with their companies as they're trying to get news out about enrollment, would be very, very helpful.
Well, we thank you for that advice, and we've been doing that, and that's been for us very valuable that we've been able to work with our companies through this and help educate those South Carolinians that might not have understood clinical trials. Many of us didn't, right? Before we were all in this. So we had, again, appreciative of BIO's guidance. And in fact, we've had BIO's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Elliot Francis, who's wonderful, at a recent SCbio board meeting. And he helped us look and try to improve our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, as you mentioned, we all have work to do. So let's focus on BIO's expand sort of filter. Last fall, we at SCbio had our first ever Young Women in Life Sciences conference, virtually, of course. We had over 500 young girls, high school aged girls from 85 different schools attend, and they listened to a diverse group of women leaders. And it was an amazing day. We addressed so many different questions. So one I have for you is, what do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership?
You know, it's interesting. The first answer that comes to mind, there's many, but the first answer that comes to mind is sometimes we're our own worst enemy. You know, we sometimes as women think that there are things that we can't do or shouldn't do or can only do in a certain way. And that sometimes negates our own individual passions and abilities and experiences. So I would say first, kind of unshackle yourself from any image of what a female or a female scientist should be, and be the kind of scientific leader or explorer that you want to be. I think that's first and foremost. The next is that we have to make sure that we are in our workplaces making room for women's real lives. I think we've seen during the pandemic, you know, my 9-year-old is back in in-person school today, so I don't have the threat of her walking in the door any moment. But I think the pandemic has shown us the reality that a lot of working moms face, and working dads. And so it's very important for us, for everyone in our workplace, to make room for family, because it's a key part. Look, we don't want people to stop having families. This is so essential for our future. So if that's our goal, then we need to make sure that we accommodate that in the workplace. And I think we're going to have to repair some of that when we come back from the pandemic. I think a lot of people have had to sacrifice around work to help balance the extra familial responsibilities they've had during the pandemic. So we, as an industry, need to be very cognizant of that. And then finally, I would say follow your curiosity as well. Whatever question is the most interest to you, that keeps you up at night, is really the one that you should pursue, be it scientific or otherwise. But I think there are a lot of great scientific minds out there that are just waiting for the permission to follow their curiosity.
I love that. Follow your curiosity. I'm going to remember that myself. And I can hear you and understand you too with the family, right? So I have a 12-year-old myself. I think things got very real this year, that everything isn't perfect, and that is okay, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, you have achieved so many distinctions, you know, including becoming the first African American to graduate from the Duke Medical Science Training Program, earning both an MD and a PhD degree. I've heard you speak about how this path was not an easy one for you. So will you share your story of attending Duke and how you found your voice?
Sure. You know, it was such an interesting thing, because I started at Harvard and I was very, very interested in biology and medicine, but also became increasingly interested in science. And so in my typical way of splitting the baby, I said, okay, I'm going to do both. And so I set out to do an MD and a PhD program. And when I landed on campus that very first week, someone from the administration said to me, oh, well, we're so glad to have you here, because, you know, the first African-American we admitted to the program left after having a psychotic break. So we're so hopeful that you're here today.
Not a great way to start. Oh my goodness.
Not a great introduction. It was very well intentioned though, but and that's, I think, a lesson to us all in this process of becoming more equitable in the spaces we build, is that sometimes those good intentions can put undue pressure, focus, spotlight on individuals. And, you know, to go through that 7-year program wondering, okay, was it that person? Was it the setting? Was this, you know, insanity-inducing goal to even pursue was challenging. And also knowing that my ability to complete it or not probably would have a great impact on those who were coming behind me. And so, I think that's something that's not unusual in terms of a responsibility that women and minority scientists and leaders face as they go along their path. So I'm not claiming that it's unique at all. But I think it was one of those situations where I realized the potential impact, for better or for worse, and really had to get clear on what I needed to make it through the program. And it was actually a United Negro College Fund Merck Fellowship, which is part of the reason I know our companies have been dedicated to this for decades, that really helped me get the independence, the resources, and the self-confidence I needed to make it through the program. I often say, medical school, as long as you show up and pass your test, you'll make it through. But graduate school is completely different. It's completely in your hands, whether you finish or not. And it's at the pace that you pursue. And so having that self-confidence, that wind at your back, is very essential. And so when we're mentoring people that are coming along behind us, it's important for us to remember to help support them in that confidence as they try to make their own path.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what a way to start. And look where you are now. So, it all works out.
It all worked out. It all worked out, definitely. And I think it was probably decades before I looked up and fully realized the impact that statement had. But
Right.
That's how life is, right? You just keep on keeping on. And then in the rear view mirror, you kind of realize all of the forces at play.
Right. You didn't realize how impactful that was when you look back and oh yeah, that was pretty big. Yeah. So, so now here we are at our industry front and center, a new administration in office. So what are the top legislative topics related to our industry that you see being a priority now?
Yes. So we're at Bio just getting ready next week to release our 100 Days of Innovation. And it's our call on the Biden administration to say, what can you accomplish in your first 100 days to show the promise of our innovative industries and really pursue those. So their priorities around climate change, their priorities around COVID, and making sure that, the early gains that we've seen in developing therapeutics and vaccines do not stop now, that they continue to go, and that they actually make it to the patients who need them, because we're seeing problems not just on the vaccine side, but also in the distribution of therapeutics as well. So we want to make sure that that stops. We also want to have some pragmatic conversations around how we support both innovation and research and development and accessibility and affordability of drugs. Those are critically important. We have to accomplish both goals. And so we really need to be partners at the table to find some new approaches to make sure that we don't handicap our innovation, but at the same time, we get our innovations out to the patients who need them. So those are some of our big buckets, but more to come. And you can see the 100 Days of Innovation at bio.org. And we're looking forward at Bio Digital in June of 2021 to do a full look back on the first 100 days of the Biden administration and really, give a grade to how well the new administration has done in promoting innovation.
Well, we appreciate your insights today, and we look forward to participating in the virtual conference. That's something we've been participating with of course, for years, and so the ability for us to all, as we are here today, virtual, to navigate this is something that we're all learning to do. So we appreciate you taking time to join us here in South Carolina today. We're hopeful for a better 2021, and we thank you again for your leadership and your dedication to our industry.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to visit you guys in person and not just virtually, but maybe someday soon.
Yes, we will look forward to that.
Wonderful.